Bien. Buenos días a todos. Estamos en el seminario Universidad de Desarrollo desde el Vicerrectorado Académico de la Universidad Nacional Mayor de San Marcos. Un honor, un gusto que nos acompañe la profesora Rodica Yanole Kalin, de la Facultad de Administración de la Universidad de Bucarest, universidad mediados del siglo XIX, es la principal universidad de Rumanía y de los Balcanes, esperando poder fortalecer relaciones con esta región y con esta universidad. Muchas gracias, Rodica. Podemos empezar.
Sí, muchas gracias, Héctor, not only for the invitation, but also for always providing this type of context of what we have in common. I think, sometimes we think about more of what is different, but when you actually dig a bit deeper and you have this comprehensive view about what is relevant, then you find many unexpected connections, and it's always a very nice learning opportunity to see this. So thank you for being here for the second lecture of this module. I hope that last time I've managed to raise your interest and some questions about the use of this type of knowledge about how to actually change behavior, which I believe is transversal from clearly, business or commercial settings to public policy, but also to other areas of our human relationships, on how to motivate, on how to work with the people around us if we change a bit the mindset that we are considering in terms of what could actually make them behave differently. So, I mean, we provided an introduction last time, and if I would just review this huge density of information about biases, I would just say this, that yes, we do have various barriers in the face of what we call rational analysis. So why are we unable to process everything, to see all the information, to always get to that mathematical solution, the maximum, the optimum, the perfection? And I do believe that in many cases, one of the most significant barriers that we have is the beliefs that we hold, and this tendency to explain other people's behaviors by projecting ourselves, So when we say that, our colleagues are not doing this because of that reason, yes, it's important to ask ourselves, if that particular reason isn't something that is mostly characteristic to our behavior, not necessarily in that context, but in general. And to that extent, not only to point that particular reason, but also to find another way of approaching it, right? So to that extent, this idea of mastering outside in thinking, right? So just not only to blame and then to expect things will just change, but to reshape a bit this approach. So I mean, this a bit in terms of the bigger perspective. Now, the point in which we stopped last time was after defining what a nudge is, right? And we said that this stands in the typology of strategies as a fourth approach. So we've discussed incentives, information, and persuasion, and then we've introduced this idea of how relevant could actually be to change the architecture of our choices, and to do this by nudging people in some direction, which is by pushing them by design or with the help of this type of cognitive features into a direction that would actually lead them to better outcomes, right? So we will discuss today some of these concrete examples and Some of them were already hinted in the comments that you had last time, but we will try to retake them a bit systematically. And in terms of lists, this is one that provides some of the most used techniques, if you want, right? So when we say what are nudges, there isn't one answer, but there are various types of intervention. There are various types of interventions that are commonly used, and they have been proved to be efficient. So the first one that you see here is this idea of default rules, right? So basically, we do what it is by default embedded into a particular program, being either if it's the rate of saving, or if it's the decision about, being, for instance, in one category or the other, which means that, we tend to stick to that particular default and not to change it very much. So the insight from this is that we really need to understand if it's not easier to actually look at places where defaults aren't what we would want, right, and change those, because the tendency of the people will be to keep them, right? So this is one big area of discussion. And there are famous studies here, like the one about organ donation. So, for instance, I don't know what is the legislation in Peru. The organ donation study was based on the logic of how to convince more people to donate organs, right? And basically, in terms of various types of interventions, which proved to be most efficient was to change this default from being an opt-in approach, right? So basically, if you want to be an organ donor, you just need to go and register as one, which is something that many people do not do because it's a complicated decision, they're undecided, and so on and so forth. So basically, at the end, there's a huge shortage of this, versus the policy tried by other countries in which the default is opt-out. So you are by default an organ donor. If you do not want to be, you need to go and say that you don't want to be, right? And you're going to be taken out of the registry. The thing is that people actually react the same, in the sense that if they are in the register, they just don't go and say, I don't want to be, So they just stick with what was already decided as being the default, because in many cases, the decision seems to be complicated enough that they, procrastinate, they don't decide. So they just stick with what was by default chosen, right? In these cases, clearly it is important to be able to change the default. That's why we were saying, that this type of intervention must preserve freedom, right? But just observing that people, are resistant to changes, especially in complicated decisions that do not affect their life day to day, right? So that extent means that they will keep that particular one. So this is one of the most famous examples on how, by comparison to trying to convince people to donate organ, just changing the default keeps the rate at higher level, and it mitigates a bit this health issue, right? And definitely this can be extended to other cases. We're going to discuss them a bit, and there is an important discussion, on how and to what extent we choose that particular default, and of course, one of the main critics in many cases is maybe that it's not right to change or to choose a particular default. But this is already done by design in so many cases, right? So the discussion should be, in what type of decisions do we want to have active choice? I mean, no default, so you just go and choose. And in what type of other decisions we need to stick with the default because it's more efficient. Yeah, so this is one big category of nudges. Another big one that we're going to touch today is the third one. And some people were already pointing it out last time, this idea of using the pressure of social norms, basically saying what most people would do and what is desirable. You know, most people would pay their taxes on time or already paid their taxes on time. You are in the minority that didn't. Most people, or, you know, as it is here, 9 out of 10 guests actually reuse their towels. So a bit of pressure that, you know, if this is the majority, maybe you should confirm. And of course, there are also various fine tuning aspects here on, you know, understanding the logic and the fact that, you know, it's not always very easy to transfer social norms from one side to the other, but the tool remains definitely very, very effective. The others are maybe not on this list because there are going to be a couple of others. They're not maybe that different technically, but they are very, very powerful. So everything that we do in terms of how to make things more accessible, or, you know, to simplify the number of steps to do something, the information can count as a nudge, because in many cases things are there, but people do not make the effort, they do not put the energy to go through them, especially now when there is that much information, right? So simplification or increasing in ease and convenience, you know, making things more accessible to you, but also this idea of disclosure, you know, telling people how past choices have actually influenced their behaviors, because now we have access to so much data. You know, this makes they are much more convincing in terms of changing behavior than the previous normative. You just need to change because it is better for you. You know, a simplified approach and a piece of past history is always more relevant. So this is one part of the typology. Let's see maybe some type of examples to make this a bit clearer. So, for instance, this is, I believe, a nice approach. It was in the parking pool of the airport. So it says maximum hug time of 3 minutes in the airport, right, for fonder farewells. If you want to say goodbye a bit longer, then yeah, use the parking and not the area that it is already crowded. So I'm curious if you see this or why we could consider this a nudge. You know, maybe it's just a fun campaign for something, maybe it doesn't contain a particular information to make people, you know, just to move faster, more efficient, or maybe it is something at that point that it is more relevant than just being, you know, a nice ad. I don't know if you would just consider this. Do you think that there is something, you know, there is a sound reasoning behind this to consider it as a good intervention, or it is just better to say, you know, do not block the line here, you're going to be fined, or, you know, you only have time that much to be here, you know, instead of putting this particular message. So I'm curious if you have an opinion on this. Either you can speak or you can write if you want. It's fine if you don't like it. I mean, if there is no...
Amber, can you... Amber.
Yeah, I think maybe I think it's a nudge, but maybe the reason behind it is because the because it's like a way to say, it's a way to it's a way to trying to change the perspective of the person, because in the line you can stay like too many times, so the person who, bueno, the person or the institution that put uh,
Is that, yeah.
indication, this indication do it because of that they are trying to change that the mind or the way to interact in the people, but in a soft way that don't trying to put orders or put indications that may can make you unfree to do hugs or other ways to say bye to their familiars or closers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you for the answer, and also thank you, Juan Jorge, for the response. Indeed, I mean, this is, in many cases, people are a bit skeptical to this, because they may say, this is a bit like a publicity or a campaign. It's not like a serious message. A serious message from an institution would be maybe like a piece of paper written very small, in which, it's written that, you only are allowed, as you said, just to move very quickly through this because it's important for, the facility, the airport, and so on, which indeed, as it is written there, yes, it does reduce resistance when you put it in a softer way. When you actually, indeed, you are not forbidding the hugs, but in a fun way, you account for the thing that, yes, you need to say farewell, but you don't need to stay there half an hour, which in many cases, with some cases may happen. Parents tend to be clingy, it can be an emotional situation. So this can actually provide a lot of inefficiency. But, just telling them, yes, clearly it's something that we understand. But yeah, if you can limit them, and the limitation and putting a number there makes things much more concrete and a bit, nicer to take. Maybe the moment is not always great to stop. So when do you stop someone in an emotional interaction? But it's, it's a sign. It's just 3 minutes. Let's try to do it, in this logic, and to keep things going. So there are, I would say, two things here. One, it's the tone of the message, right? The fact that somehow traditional strategies are very normative. You need to do this because if not, you're going to get a fine, or it's wrong, or things like that. While here, the act itself, it's normalized. So clearly you can do this, but yes, under a certain limitation, so that we all have room enough. And the limitation, I think it's expressed nicely, in saying, what is a 3-minute hug, or just give a number that is reasonable. If you actually test this, it seems fine, but that still provides some type of order, right? So this would go into the direction of both making things easier to understand. Give people exact instruction, not just tell them, do not stand there because you are in my way. Do not simply tell them, these are instructions, because every place has a long list of rules and instructions that we do not see, we do not understand, especially in this type of moments, but make this clearer and accessible and put it nicely, So this is a type of visual nudging that actually worked. So I think this is from New Zealand or Australia, if I remember correctly, right? Yes. Similarly, when maybe you try to convince kids or students, yes, about the potential downsides, let's say, of spending your time in a certain way, right? So yeah, the same question would be here, So you can tell them staying too much and looking at TV series or movies or whatever, it's going to be bad for, your energy, productivity, whatever. Well, what this particular post is doing, it says, yes, you pay a particular price for this subscription. You think that this is the price, but if you are considering something that in economics we call the opportunity cost, you're going to see that the price is not only $6.99. It could be much more, because it's the amount of time that you're spending. And in that particular time, you could do something else that would be much more valuable. So if you could work 1 hour and 1 hour of your time is $50, then clearly, right, there is a big imbalance. If you could read a book, that could actually be much more valuable because it helps you grow in a certain direction, again, much more valuable. So this is basically just to point out that in many situations, prices are just capturing one side of how we use a particular resource. And if you make people reflect a bit more on what they could gain in reality, they may at least be more considerate, next time when they actually say, this is nothing, it's a free subscription. Or, the same could be, I'm doing this with my students when I ask them, so what is the price of Facebook? And they're saying, oh, well, it's free, of course, so I do not pay any type of subscription. But then when we are considering, how many hours they spend, what is their actual benefit from there versus what potential costs they could incur in a week, in a month, in a year, then it becomes that, well, it's not really that free. Yeah, there is some information, there is some networking that maybe I'm actually not using that much and I'm just consuming passively. But what else could I do if I would put my mind on it? This is much more. So again, the logic of the nudge is to contrast these things in a way that it is much easier to signal and to process by our brain, So in many cases, we do know these things, but when we see them in a context, they can actually be more convincing and stay more with us. So it is both the presentation of the information and also, in many cases, their visual impact. So when you try to tell someone that, time is the most important resource, this is very abstract. When you try to consider what is the value of your time by comparison to what you're actually doing and gaining, yes, the perspective may shift, right? So it is at least a much better step in creating this awareness. Yeah. So these are a few examples, and I'm sure that for many of them, it would be nice to add, more specific examples of maybe what also you see as good campaigns in Lima or in Peru, and this is something interesting, to add that value. While in other cases, what we see is somehow transversals. For instance, what are the signaling or the warnings that are used in some industries, like for cigarettes. These are somehow regulated by region, and we tend to see more or less the same type of approach on how to point out people that, smoking kills, or it can generate various health issues. And in this particular case, we do see that this type of approach of very salient warnings is actually not an efficient nudge for cigarettes, because smoking is a much more complicated behavior to change, because it also moves a bit closer to a type of addiction, right? So even if we see the images, yes, what happens the studies are saying that, yes, we become desensitized, right? So we just try to avoid this, but we do not change behaviors. So this is a case in which, yes, because the behavior is more complex, we probably need to tackle it differently. Other cases of nudges that are also wildly popular are these ideas of pre-commitment strategies, basically to deal with various self-control problems, right? So, for instance, attending a class like this one, I'm sure it blocks an important part of your day, 2 hours in the middle of the week. So you know how to be sure that even if you said in the beginning that you're going to participate, maybe, you're going to be tempted to do something else. So, one type of pre-commitment could be that you say that, I'm going to do this, and not only to yourself, but maybe, you've written to Professor Maldonado and said, yes, I'm going to come to this class. And now that you've pre-committed to this, there is a stronger link there that maybe keeps you in the loop because, I've already said this, right? So it keeps me there. So, or if I discuss with other people and so on. And this is, of course, something that is at a smaller level. You would say, yes, it's just keeping your word, but can be translated to various other self-control problems that we may have. How to keep ourselves motivated to do things that we know that they're good for us, but in the same time, this is not necessarily happening. So for self-control, this is a huge area of applications on how we want to, keep ourselves on track with this, small types of strategies that we use, not because we do not believe that, exercising every day is good or saving every day is good, but because we are faced with many types of temptations. So we do need some other tools to help us deal with this, and this is something that that also goes into this category of nudges, and we're going to talk about some of them. The rest here are also simpler approaches, but very efficient, reminding people about doing things. But there is also, a specific way of doing this. So what works better is just to be sure that you remind people just in time. So not, various random reminders, but, one day before or in the moment in which, maybe they have that they have more time or that they have the money to do or that they're in a place that they're close and so on. So this idea of, having smart reminders is definitely good, and it has been proven correct for, various types of prevention behaviors or payment behaviors. The same with the next one, this idea of making people express their intention to do something, right? So, for instance, there's a lot of work on people's behavior regarding voting, right? So what works the best in terms of intention is to ask people very concrete details, So do you plan to vote? Okay. Where you're going to vote, at what time you're going to do it. I mean, do you plan to do it in that particular day, in the morning, at lunch, in the evening? You're going to go alone or with someone else? Things like this that are basically anchoring us in that particular day. And yes, the intention is one step closer to the behavior, and this intention is more efficient when it becomes more concrete, right? So we stay with that things. So as you see, the range of these tools is quite high. And that's why we also have a lot of experiments just to try to, point out how exactly we should implement this type of tools so that they become more efficient. Some of them are already efficient on a commercial basis, if you want. So basically, many of this type of principles have been applied in apps or various software programs, or educational tools. If you know Duolingo, to learn a new language. Basically, what they have here is exactly what we discussed. Duolingo asks you to pre-commit. I'm going to set an objective. I'm going to spend 5 minutes every day on this app. If you don't do it, they send you reminders. Duo is upset with you. Do you want to learn something new? They have this, social norm approach. When you do a lesson, they're saying, 50% of the population already learned this, or you are on top of that or below this, or things like this. So this type of engagement actually makes the tool easier, accessible, and more efficient in terms of staying there. So this is also something that, when we kind of know that there are some concepts at play, we can say, why is this working better than a language lesson? At the end of the day, there is much more value maybe in a book or in a lecture, but people are not following those, right? So at the end, we do see that this is something that has been managing to use these pieces of information and to make it so that people actually follow this much more easier, and they are more connected and more engaged. So basically, of course, it's very hard to make every class like Duolingo, but if we're able to provide feedback better, to compare it better, to give this type of reminders and so on, then, there are chances that we increase this to a higher level. And if it's not Duolingo, then of course you can consider other types of applications and to look a bit through their design and to see, okay, maybe this is efficient, not because those people were the most creative people at all, genius in designing them, but because they knew how to take this particular principle and put it at use. And then, this is also a valuable lesson, right? Another effect here is, this idea of enacting change in moments that we associate with a new beginning. I think I was saying last time that it's good that this class is in January, because at the beginning of a year or the start of a new year, we tend to have this New Year's resolution. But this is not something that should be confined to the end of the year or to the beginning of the year, because this idea of a fresh new start that is pushing us could be actually anything that we put meaning into it. It could be a new semester, it could be a new month, it could be our birthday, it could be any occasion that we can empower and we can say, I create a moment in which I try to lose a bit my bad habits and to try to behave differently. And of course, this is not going to change everything, but it is a new ingredient that we observe. I'm able to do this at the beginning, and this makes me more optimistic, more motivated, and again, it keeps me on track, right? So it is another addition of the fact that, normally we could do the same every day. That would be the mathematical approach. We do not need special days. But the reality is that our mind actually is more efficient when we go for this particular valuable moment. Yeah. So with this in mind, the logic is, I would say, to go a bit both ways, so to look into papers that are trying to structure this variety of tools. For instance, here you have a table that says, at what part of the decision should I look? At the information and you see here 3 types of nudges, translate the information, so reframe it, simplify it, make it visible, and provide feedback. So not only that it's good, but how good it is, and visual cues. And then also provide some reference points from how other people in the community around behave. So social norms, descriptive norms, but people think it's good. So this is in terms of information. If I look at the structure, I go to other types of nudges. Yes, what are the defaults for this particular choice? Yes, I can adapt it. It's an active choice. What should I do? Then consider how much effort this particular option involves. So if I'm able to make it to simplify a bit, not by doing myself the effort, but by making clearer steps or eliminating things that are redundant, then this is great. And this is also relevant in terms of changing categories. Maybe there are too many, so that I can group them or propose new categories, but also emphasize a bit better what are the consequences. Yes, and the last one, how can I assist people into this decision with reminders, with better commitment, and so on. So basically, this is ordering what we've discussed by what are the features of the decisions that I'm analyzing. And it is useful to see that basically in what we want to change, maybe there is a critical point and we should focus on this. Not all tools must be used at once, but it is important to have this type of mapping. This, for instance, is another one. It speaks about how transparent or non-transparent are nudges, right? If I see how they work, or if I'm just doing things behind the scene, right? So people are not doing this, and then how much change I add to the environment, or if I'm just extending things. Yeah, so this is another type of mapping that can be relevant to what I do. And what is in general relevant is this horizontal axis of how transparent or non-transparent are some actions, because if I'm working on an issue that it is a public sector topic or a state the related decisions, then I would like to be more on the transparency and accountability side. If I'm more on a commercial basis, like a business, then I do not always need to disclose this much. And this we also see a lot in practice, right? And so then again, these are criteria that we want to use in filtering some of the nudges, so that what we get is consistent with the problem that we want to have. Yeah, and finally, yes, please, Ambar.
Professor Rodica, I keep thinking about the case of Duolingo, and they also use some message that say that you are part of the 10 or 5% of people that practice every day. So, and in order to that, I think that it's like an example of using social norms, because they are like showing the reference of other people, and that if you continue doing that, you keep practicing every day, you don't feel like you are behind those people. In other way, you keep improving yourself, or keep staying on those reduces percent of people. So that's like a transparent way to change a transparent way to change that decision.
Yeah, so it's a good observation. So I mean, it's not completely transparent, because we actually do not have the information about how many people use this, so it's a bit hard to check if Duolingo is just trying to praise you, or if it's the reality of what is happening. So in that sense, it is a type of, social pressure. Yes, we assume that it could be correct or not, but we do not have access to data. So that's why, from a business perspective, many people maybe do not ask this, but yes, they feel that, they are placed, the company has your data and you are placed on this continuum. It's not that they hide you. So I assume we can ask for data, but it's complicated to actually compute if you are in those 25% or not. If this would be a message from the state, saying that you are among the 25% that pay their taxes in January, then this really needs to be public information if you ask for it. So they need to say, this is based on this data set and so on. Because if, you discover that this is a false information, besides the fact that this is not ethical, then what is happening is that the trust between the public and the state or the company is destroyed, right? So it's going to actually be very hard that any of the messages afterwards to be, efficient. Yeah. So transparent is in the sense of how much we are able to obtain that particular information. Yeah. So if we are able to have an understanding of this information, either through statistical data, either through, people that are counting things, then it is transparent. If not, indeed, maybe the way it is positioned there as being transparent as social proof is not always correct. And I believe there are situations, for instance, with voting. There was this campaign of, I think, posting how many of your friends have voted or something like that, and then just saying that you are in this category of people that voted up to a certain hour or in a certain day and so on. So this was something that you couldn't follow because voting is anonymously, right? So in that sense, it was a message completely untraceable, so I could say whatever I want. So it was not transparent. But of course, that in the heat of the moment, when you are actually not thinking about it, it could actually be efficient. So it's a very good question. I would say that nowadays, because there is much more information available and you can track things, on the phone with various, activities on the internet, it can be transparent if we think about asking, for that particular information, or as individuals, or as, as NGOs or public groups and so on. But if not, it could also be, non-transparent. And yes, then it really depends if we trust those that are telling us this, For Duolingo, and with this I close, I believe that the logic is that if you believe them, it is in your own benefit, you feel good that you are there. So in that sense, yes, of course, that you are also a user of their application, you can pay or you can use it for free, but nonetheless, it's a clear sense of the fact that it is good for you to do this, because there is a certain learning. So somehow it's not that important that this is the message, because you can easily see that it's good for you. For other messages where, you don't always see the relevance, right? You can always say, voting is good in general. This is the principle of democracy, but maybe you don't want to be pushed that much. Or, you can say paying taxes is also good, but you do not see the benefits because the state is inefficient. So again, you can be restrictive on this. So yeah, very good point that the way it is put in this table assumes that you can see the information based on which you are being compared with other people. If you do not see this, then it does not become transparent. Yeah, thank you for your comment. Okay, so I think we have reached the point in which a break would be good. So now I'm aware that is 5 minutes to 12 in Lima. So I propose 10 minutes. So we come back at 5 minutes after 12 your time. Yeah, 10 minutes of break. Okay.
Ok.
Thank you.
Okay, later.
Al final de cada sesión, el Brad comparte la lista, el formato de asistencia. Estimados asistentes, por el chat pueden ver el link, el website de la Sociedad de el Comportamiento y el último congreso con el programa que fue en la Universidad de Trento este año pasado. Sí, después de clase, el material. Se hace presente que Perú y Rumanía tienen una larga tradición en relaciones diplomáticas que datan del primer tercio del siglo XX. Debido a la Segunda Guerra Mundial se cortaron, siendo reanudadas en el gobierno de Velasco Alvarado, y ambos países tienen presencia diplomática, embajada, tanto Rumanía en Perú como Perú en Rumanía. Se destaca también que el rector de la Universidad de Bucarest, Emil Constantinescu, llegó a ser presidente de Rumanía a fines del siglo XX. Bucarest, en ese sentido, es una universidad pública con una gran tradición casi contemporánea a la dependencia del país se establece esta universidad.
Okay, so I was hearing something about former president.
Rodica, San
Yes.
Marcos, en el siglo XX, el presidente del Perú llegó a participar de las celebraciones de la fundación de la universidad que se llevan a cabo el 12 de mayo. Así como Bucarest, San Marcos ha tenido esta proyección y presencia en la...
Okay. Very nice. Yeah. I haven't asked you, you've been to Romania or to Bucharest or not yet?
No.
No. Okay, so I have to make another link. Okay, good. Okay, so we stopped at
No.
this.
Rodica,
Yes.
Eloísa, ¿me escuchas? Eloísa, ¿me escuchas? Bien, tenemos en el seminario alumnos de Sao Paulo que participan también desde Sao Paulo en tu sesión, Rodica.
Okay. Okay, good. So if they're not here now, they're going to be at other occasion to see them. But yes, thank you for opening this to so many students and universities. Okay. Okay, so we can start with this provoking question of the difference between behavioral economics and social engineering. I mean, I will give you my answer. That is that behavioral economics is in itself a field, an academic field that uses proper methodologies to account for, how various psychological factors affect our economic decisions, right? So yes, we test this as rigorously as possible. There is replication, effects that do not hold after some point, there are retraction and so on. Social engineering, to my knowledge, is not in itself a field. So it's more a bit of a technique, I would say. Probably indeed the logic, the communality is that the technique makes use of, this type of flaws in human psychology, right? But they're not always for the good. And this is because it's not, under a certain academic or scientific field. So behavioral economics has various, ethical consideration guiding the field. So the logic is to understand and to predict human decision making, to have better design, policy improvements, and so on. While, when you say social engineering is a bit on how I can manipulate you a bit better. So I would say that, this is not, they can intersect, but I do not believe that the amplitude of behavioral economics accounts for this. If you want, I would say that social engineering is a bit on the negative side of application that we see here. I do not believe it is transparent at all, right? So it seems that it's a tool, but you do not actually see what is being done. While what we do in behavioral economics is to see why is this working, so you can actually see it as not, it's not, hidden. And as I said, it has ethical rules. There are frameworks on how to use this in policy. There are frameworks on, how to study people, not as targets or to exploit vulnerabilities, but, as participants to this research. I would say positive application. So, to my view, you can say that social engineering is just a small and often, unfortunately, bad use of the knowledge that we have. The problem being that in general, when you have this approach, is mostly with somehow untested techniques, right? So I know how to convince you, but not, through the same methodological rigor. So that would be my answer to this. I don't know if it fits your views, but this is my belief. Okay. So if we can kind of close this loop with categories of nudges. Yes, and actually a bit kind of going into this direction. For instance, there is in many cases a discussion on why are nudges any different than marketing technique in itself, and the response is the same as with social engineering, because when we are considering the range of this intervention, we consider them with the purpose of increasing the well-being of the people that are addressed by this particular policy, right? So when you have defaults to actually make people save more for retirement, this is because there is enough statistical data to show that if we do not have enough money in retirement, this is going to be bad both for the individual and the system in terms of how they would live. So, of course, there could be variations on how people approach retirement and so on, but on average, the statistics kind of show that this is the best approach to actually save more during your lifetime. And that's why we consider this to be, the positive side of using a tool like the default, right? While in other cases, of course, that defaults could be used negatively, just to keep you under an option that it's not good for you, and this is not something that it is supported by the field. Yeah, so at the end of the day, we discuss tools and frameworks. Everything could be used for good or for bad, physics, mathematics, economics in itself. But yes, the way we curate interventions and recommendation actually goes into this logic, right? So increasing the well-being of the individuals, right? This doesn't mean that there are not still questions that are not being completely answered. Some of them are here, right? One of the frequent one that, yes, we've also tackled through the comments is this issue of transparency. So there is somehow this fear that if you actually disclose to people the mechanism, you don't know probability very well. So yeah, if I presented this information like a frequency and not probability, and if I told you that this is not going to work, or if I tell people that we need to account for over optimism, this is not going to work, and so on. So this, yes, it's a relevant risk to consider, but in many cases, making things transparent does not eliminate the power of the tools, right? So this is actually what we see as recommendation, specifically because we do not want to stay in this black corner, do not tell people what we do. Yeah, tell them, because still the effect is going to be there. What we do not know for sure is if nudges actually have the same efficiency on the long run, which means that, yes, they may fade in time, or they may work better in the short run, which means that, yeah, there is the need to combine them with something else to focus a bit more on their sustainability. So this is a real challenge. Yes, and the other two, in relation to standard policies, they are, again, not addressed comprehensively, right? So we cannot simply say that all nudges will be better than standard policy, right? So in some cases, yes, I was saying they can maybe have, if not correctly implemented, an effect on the trust people have, in terms of efficiency, transparency. So this is an issue. In other cases, indeed, maybe they are not well calibrated. So this is something to consider, especially in countries that do not have a very strong experience of working with this idea of having evidence-based policy. Right? Romania, for instance, doesn't have this. So of course that, yes, the magic of nudges, yes, and it's incorrect to say magic, but the power of nudges cannot equivalent for the lack of trust in institutions and efficiency, right? So this is something that exists, and we need to consider that. Now, to go back to applications, a bit of a rhetorical question, but because we've already given some examples, but just to point out, what are those areas where nudges have been applied by now, or basically are more likely to apply, right? So in what type of context, for what type of behaviors they actually work.
Well, Professor, I think in base on the examples that you said before, the nuts are more applied in areas like the public decision is important. For example, the public health, also the healthy eating in the society, or things like the pay your taxes, something like that, because they are like, they can feel identified to other peoples in the society. And also they are like decisions that are easy to take. They are not like too difficult to make a difference or make a change in their decision.
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Amber, for your question. Indeed, yes, we focused on those examples because those are some of the most tackled areas. So if we would order them a bit in terms of what has been published or tested, this is atop a hierarchy of them. So we start with health and well-being in general, but it is both physical and mental well-being. Exactly what you are saying. Eating behavior, this is because, of course, the implications are, again, huge for both public health, but also for what we see in terms of causes of mortality and morbidity. And then we see this category: savings, financial decision, tax compliance, basically decisions that are related to money in one way or another, right? So they are important both for individuals and institutions. And then, of course, that we do see them in other places, right? So, for instance, there is an increase of nudges in education, both for students on how to motivate them, but also for teachers. A lot of work on how to be more energy efficient, to mitigate climate change, things like this, to change individual behaviors. And then, yes, we go into different directions. But these are kind of the most relevant one. Just to point out a bit what I was hinting before in terms of famous studies, just to have all the data here. If I would pick one, indeed, I would go with this organ donation study that reflects on the power of defaults, because it is very salient. So now it's a bit old, it has more than 20 years, but still relevant. The logic here was, to provide an explanation for the gap that you see on this graph. Countries on the left in yellow with this effective consent percentages. How many people would consent to donate organs? So not actual donations, but how many would agree to do it? And these are relatively low numbers, from 4 to maximum 27%, versus what we see in blue, which are almost 100%, 98, well, a bit less, 85, 99, and so on. So just to play a bit the logic of searching for an explanation, as a student, what are the common reasons that could lead to this? And then we look into the data and we see if things are that different. Are people more concerned about others in the blue countries? They care more about the fact that by donating their organs, they help other people live. No evidence that in some countries people are more altruistic than in others, so it falls. Are people in the blue countries part of some type of or hold some type of religious beliefs, that makes them more open to this type of practice? Well, not consistently. If we compare with the groups, we see Belgium is similar enough to the Netherlands, or Germany to Austria, or Denmark to the Nordic countries. So the groups are heterogeneous in terms of, religious beliefs, or in terms of some aspects in the legislation and so on. So when we consider this, first, what they did, in the initial study was to control for this. Do you have transplant infrastructure? What's economics? What's educational status? Religion? And basically the gap was still there. So what was really making the difference between the groups was this particular aspect in the default policy, in the sense that actually in some countries you needed to say if you do not want to be an organ donor. So basically there was what we called a presumed consent. So by default, all people were organ donors. That's why the numbers were that high. You could opt out if you didn't want it. And, if we go back to the photos, we see that, yes, maximum of people that actually opt out of this is 15% in Sweden, and the rest is 1 to 3%, just people saying that they don't want it, right? In the countries with low rates, this consent was explicit. So by default, you were not an organ donor. You needed to go there and to sign and say, yes, I want to be it. So basically what makes the difference is that in the face of the decision, people actually behave similarly. So they didn't took the decision because in many cases it was complicated, many trade-offs to consider, and not affecting actually their daily life, on a day-to-day basis, right? So most of them would postpone to do this, right? But what happened as a result was very different, because those that didn't do anything and they were organ donors by default remained organ donors. Those that didn't do anything but they weren't organ donors, yes, were not in that category. So the result is, yes, clearly a very different one depending on this, initial way of phrasing the policy. And yes, from what I know, even in Latin America, this has generated, so the study is from 2003. So in time, because this is a serious shortage and problem, actually countries have changed their position on this policy, becoming what they're called an opt-out. So basically by default, people become donors and they can say if they do not want. So you see Argentina, Uruguay, Chile, but also the Netherlands and France a bit more recently. So it was something that led to huge change in this area. This doesn't mean that it is easy to do or that all people agree with this, right? So there is, of course, controversy. And a lot of this was discussed in the US when, they tried to do this on some states, right? And they actually did it. I think it was California and some other countries. But then when they asked people, you see that many of them were opposing the policy, and they were saying that, it seems to them that this is not enough freedom of change, and they wouldn't necessarily wanted it like this. So what they did was also to actually try to test the idea in which there shouldn't be a pre-assumed default, and that the choice should be what they called an active choice, right? So basically, you do not let people just do this choice when they want it, but you prompt them, you ask them, so you need to decide, right? So this is considered something that gives people more freedom than putting them in the opt-out condition. So you see that this is another shift that some countries have made, or states from the US and the UK, and being something that we can easily test. There is actually a paper that looks at this situation in which, instead of default, the states moved to active choice. And yes, what happened was that, yes, people feel that, their freedom is a bit better respected, but also the outcome in terms of policy was a decline in the registration rate, right? So yeah, it means that more people decide to stay on the no. And it is a choice in policy if you want to follow more people's preferences, or if you want to maybe favor what seems to be a policy with good results in terms of outcomes in public health, saving more people because you have organs, yes, versus respecting people's preferences, and the compromise would be to save a bit less. So it's definitely something not easy to decide. The logic being, that you as a country needs some type of testing, some type of empirical evidence in order to actually be similar to the citizen, to make your choice under enough information. And so this is just to point out, and if we would be in a different setting, that would be a nice exercise to have as working groups. But maybe if it's something related to your topic, you can do with your students, because basically it prompts the discussion on when do we want to use defaults because they're useful and because they're going to be successful, versus those situations in which they could actually harm people's beliefs, people's preferences, and instead of that, you may actually want to have this particular option of an active choice. So considering that we've done the exercise, I will just point out what are considered to be three critical aspects to have in mind if you plan to design such a default. So the first one would be, who, in terms of the person that decides, is proposing that particular default, right? Because if people actually believe that the individual or the team that recommends this stands in a high point there, it's a trusted recommendation. People trust that those that are proposing this are motivated by good reasons and not by speculative one, a conspiration, and so on. Then the choice is going to be then the choice of default is going to work better. If you do this with your students and you have your students considers that the professor actually looks out for their well-being, then there is reason enough to consider that this is going to work. If a politician that is suspicious about having various types of interest, or it doesn't have a good ethical profile, proposes a default, even if the proposition is good, it may stand a lower chance of succeeding because people may consider something else about those particular intentions. So that's why it's not enough to propose a solution that has been tested somewhere else. Who proposes it, and what type of evidence is presented to the public? If you pair up with academics, if they're respective, if as it is always the case, bring in international experts, if you show the data and so on, clearly if you discuss it, then the chances of the intervention will grow. Then a second element here would be how easy it is to stay with that particular default. Just a moment to plug my laptop. Sure. So the logic would be here also to understand yes, the easiness of the individuals to actually change away from the default, right? So if the decision or if the effort is significant to move from the default, then clearly there's going to be a higher chance for people to stick with it. If it's very easy, you know, if the decision doesn't have, you know, any complicated trade-off there, or if there is no procedure and so on, so moving this is super simple, then defaults are actually not that efficient. So here clearly is a bit of fine-tuning, because you need to be able to move, you need to be able to choose something else, yeah, so that you still have freedom. But how easy is this? Yeah, this is again a contextual issue. If, for instance, you make every aspects of the movement possible online, maybe it's going to be easier for some part of the population, maybe for others not, you know. So you need to consider if you have equity on this aspect. If you need to have a step in which you go physical to an institution to put something, then yeah, probably this is going to make it a bit more difficult. So just understanding a bit what is the, you know, the way we say it, the bureaucracy or the process of changing is also very, very important for the default itself, you know. And finally, a third ingredient here for the efficiency of nudges is this idea of endowment. To what extent people understand that default is, you know, a type of current state of affairs, is the status quo. Because if they perceive it as a status quo, then they're going to like it more. Because on average, yes, most individuals tend to be resistant to change. Yes, that's why these type of change of policies, what we've seen, you know, in California, in UK, and so on, they must be prepared. Yeah, so you need to consider that the new option is being more and more seen by the population as what should be, you know, a status quo. If you change it abruptly, then indeed there is a huge possibility that people will not stick to it, just because there is a countervailing force, another bias there, which is resistant to change, you know, so you want to minimize this particular resistance. So all in all, these are, you know, some tips about how should we design better defaults. With this in mind, there are studies like this one that actually look at all studies up to a point. So this is from 2019, so not very old, working with defaults, and puts together their effects. So you see that on average, based on this meta-analysis, the defaults increased the likelihood of that option to be chosen by approximately 27%. So this is their, you know, efficiency degree. So now you could say, you know, from 27% to 100%, yeah, there's a lot of room to improve. But consider how one can move from 0 to 27 just by changing the default, which is not necessarily making huge investments in, you know, various types of activities, just considering what would be the better predetermined option to put there, especially if you start a new project, if you have a new type of policy, you have this option of deciding what the default should be. And it is huge if you are able to start from 27% because you are able to choose a good one. Yeah. Now, there are also differences in terms of the type of decision that is more sensitive to the default. For instance, this study shows that decisions related to everyday consumption actually are more easy to be swayed with a good default than decisions, as I'm going to show immediately, that are related either to health or to the environment are less sensitive to defaults. Yeah, so this is interesting to consider because it brings us back to the basic information about how we behave in relation to various types of biases. So one explanation here that we are easily convinced by the defaults when it comes to consumption is because we have actually less defined or less strong preferences in consumption. So yes, we do not know really what type of chocolate do we want, what type of particular type of vegetables or particular. So I mean, yes, we probably have some preferences, but in terms of brands, right, what becomes a default for us actually is going to have a much stronger impact because we do not probably consider that much the importance of some daily decisions. And this is the second, argument that the default is stronger when that particular decision seems not to be that important. In other words, it doesn't really have a direct effect for the individuals, right? So by comparison to health care decisions, where defaults maybe are not easily embraced because, of course, that the importance of a good surgery or a good treatment is much higher for us. Maybe we do actually have much more specific preferences on what type of medication do we want, of what type of substances, procedures, and so on. Then yes, this is not an area that should be tackled with defaults. At the other end, yes, maybe preferences related to the environment, how efficient is the car or how efficient are the appliances and so on, doesn't mean necessarily that we care so much more about the environment than the consumption, but maybe they are more important for us because they are more prominent in our budget, so it's more expensive. Right, so what type of new technology you buy, how to be more eco-friendly, and so on. If it's more expensive, then you pay more attention. So to that extent, the default is it's less strong there. Yeah. So these are just some of the points that I find to be relevant on choosing the defaults, while keeping in mind that a good choice here could actually propel you to that 27%, maybe 30% of efficiency that it's not easily obtained in terms of cost efficiency by other interventions. Yeah. Okay, so I will stop with again what could be a bit of a debate, especially in this area of how efficiency could be seen for defaults. Just rephrasing a bit, yes. So to what extent we could argue that nudges could be applied on everyone or on large part of the population, So basically, this is because there are this type of concerns that maybe, more vulnerable population, less educated, are actually more prone to be, manipulated or indoctrinated. While the other part could say, yes, clearly this is a risk, but various nudges could actually, enhance the autonomy of some individuals, because they put them on a path that they wouldn't choose in a different way, and that particular path is actually good for them. Yeah. So this is just to point this particular concept, this idea of nudgeability, the susceptibility to being affected by a nudge, that actually says that yes, we do see that people are equally responsive to nudges, but yeah, there are variations in terms of impact, experience, and so on. The question in respect to efficiency of nudges in terms of environmental preferences. So, I mean, I believe that usually environmental preferences simply have or involve expenses that are a bigger part of our budget. So to that extent, what car do we drive? How efficient is our fridge? What do we buy in terms of, various appliances that we have? This is something that we feel more, by comparison to food, clothing decisions, and so on. So this is something that could explain the fact that we pay more attention, which is the equivalent of the fact that we are less responsive to defaults. This is also an open question to discuss to what extent this environmental preferences are the same around many countries. So the study on defaults, I believe it has a big part of the sample that contains studies from the US and from Western Europe. So there, I think that both the expenses and the discussion about the environment is a bit more advanced. I'm not sure that this is the same in other countries, right? So it may be also something that reflects, let's say, a bit on the evolution of some societies and how their preferences may move into one direction or the other. Not last, also, I believe that among the psychological mechanisms here, some are a bit more triggered by what we can see a bit more clearly as some type of effects of climate change, so temperature rising, various types of negative events in terms of, tornadoes, floods, things like this. So I think that people are a bit more sensitive now in terms of climate. So this could also make them a bit more aware that, yes, preferences for the environment matter. So these could be explanations for why this is so. But with this in mind, that we really need to check what countries have been included in this, again, beyond US and the Western Europe. Yes, clearly pre-existing preferences are relevant. So yes, a certain degree of experience is important. So of course that, for instance, when you have maybe more health issues and you have a particular interaction with health providers and a system that can actually moderate this nudgeability, I think maybe a bit less with finance, considering that we do see, a lot of biases also in terms of investments and in terms of experts working in finance. And I believe that this is also because the level of uncertainty of what should we do with our money on the long term is higher, right? But definitely, yes, a certain type of more intensive experience actually generates this type of pre-existing preferences, because this is also one of the logics that is being applied, that we do not necessarily have this type of innate preferences, like in archaeology, you dig and you find your exact preference on how should you do with the money or how much risk do you have. But the other perspective tells us that we construct preferences depending on our exposure to task, events, and so on. So basically, if we have more exposure to health decisions, then our preferences will be better constructed because we've been exposed to this. If we have better exposure, on various types of transaction investment, and so there's a higher chance of these to be there, right? So it's a valid question. Yes, yeah, thank you for the questions and the comments. Yes, and yes, also thank you for this last one. That indeed, this is also an emerging topic, on acceptability of nudges. If we can include some type of protection against manipulation, or at least some type of techniques. And I think someone was also saying, this idea of boosts that we're going to mention, not only automatic nudges, but also things that help us to improve some capabilities, right? So clearly this improves the logic. Yeah. So yeah, very tough question to end with. I'm not sure that behavioral economics is something that is going to generate such a big shift, from like what we've seen from moral science into value neutral. Yeah, so my response here is not that we have an abdication of agency, is that we actually understand better what is the biology behind it. Of course, that, we have a lot of, we cling to this idea of free will. So yeah, saying that we don't have free will, it's something that doesn't sound good. But basically, we understand the brain better now. We have better imaging techniques. We have more research, so it's not such a black box. So yeah, it was logic that, Adam Smith was looking at moral sentiment in a certain way. Now we actually understand a bit, but not completely, but a bit better. So it's not that much that we leave it behind, but I do believe that we put more science into economics with behavioral economics, because you do have neuroimaging, much more rigorous experiment, much more testing, much more data that puts you in this direction. So it's not that we do not want to have agency. It is that, this is what we see into the data, that it's not enough to, have full information if you don't have it. It's not enough, to say that you're going to process everything because you are unable to do it. And at the end of the day, I do believe that what puts us at risk is that we actually do not understand other tools, like, you have artificial intelligence tools that you don't actually get. So this is a big risk, not to have autonomy, because we've developed this. Yes, of course, that this is one perspective, that the behavior changes according to the benefit or lack of benefit that they perceive. So yeah, absolutely, I agree with this. And yeah, you phrase it very nicely, for capable individuals. I don't know what is the percentage of it, but yes, for those, yes, clearly you do see benefits in a different way. You don't need this. Yeah, absolutely, I agree with this. And of course, the logic, I also agree that this is, and I think it's a nice label, not necessarily for rational. You can accept, that you have your flaws, but you are able indeed to come with a particular type of judgment. Unfortunately, I don't see this percentage going up, because of course that we have much more information, much more tools, but not necessarily more capability, right? Sometimes it is intentional, and this is bad. Sometimes it is purely unintentional. I don't know, what is your experience with students, but I tend to tell them this, so you have so much tools, information, article, papers that I ever had before, so I had to dig everything by myself. And I actually fear this somehow. You have that many apps, that many tools. You're going to find the information faster and better than me, but they don't. Which means that there are some issues along the way that keeps them, demotivated, unable to make use of the information and so on. And I think that this is part of, the good way in which the science can be used. There is also a bad way. But I do believe that this is inherent to everything that we learn, how to make good or how to make bad. And a bit to reflect on this idea of morality, of course, that I do believe that it is important to keep this in mind, to try to use this for the well-being that we believe it is, to help people understand a bit better what is their well-being and to follow this. Maybe not for everyone, it is in their own interest to save more. I agree with this, but just to be a bit more aware of this, that you are making decisions nowadays with this understanding that, you want to live in the moment and not necessarily to wait 50 years. I applaud this. But for many people, they say, yes, I want to live in the moment, but I also want this and this and this. And after a point, you become disappointed that you didn't follow a path to put you there. So, being capable and understanding the implications of your decision, this is part of it, and I think it is definitely very important. Yes, thank you for this idea. Of course, that there is a tendency of quick fixes, and this is happening with nudges. What we're going to see is that nudges are just one part of these tools. So probably in the last class, we're going to look more at bigger frameworks, bigger methodologies that are not only considering nudges, but, just part of them, and they combined it a bit better, so that to a certain extent is not necessarily just correcting, but also indeed, helping people to grow. But I'm not saying it's not a concern, but I think that there are steps there, so we are not necessarily on this particular brink. Okay. Yes, thank you. Indeed, this is congruent with this idea that we need to have some goals, as citizens, and define what we want to change in this relationship. This is part of the freedom, and not to accept everything. And of course, criticizing what we see here is also part of the discussion. So I think that this is also good. This is what science should be. There is no development in biology, in chemistry, that doesn't come with this idea. But what if I do something that has particular other downsides? And the logic is that the scientists can do a bit, but the rest should also be seen, as pressures from, the academia and the public and so on, so that we have a better understanding of this, So I do not want to defend the field, just try to position a bit in the middle, and to point this out, also with the purpose that, future interventions from now on will be able to incorporate a bit more on this. Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much for your comments. I'm also, considering a bit how to, adjust based on this. Thank you for your feedback today. And the participation.
Rodica.
Yes.
Well, multimex forte mult. Espersa poti visita Lima. Espersa devi prima femeie professorara della Università di Bucaresti, la Università Nazionale di San Marco.
Okay, muchas gracias. Yes, I would really like this, and I will definitely let you know if I'm able to
We
do
have
it.
time. We have time, Rodica. Yes, it's very difficult the distance, but I hope can this year or the next year. I host in Lima and host in San Mark, and share your experience and share the Bucharest University experience to our community. I shared
Thank you.
the festival, the folkloric festival, the San Mark. No, each year,
Mhm.
each faculty, the university, 20 faculty, each faculty has a folkloric ballet. No, this day the 20 faculty compete to the first prize in this interfaculty folkloric prize.
Mhm, mhm. Okay,
In
it
San
sounds
Marcos,
very
you can
interesting.
see the student love the dance, love, yes, the study, but love the dance too.
Okay, yeah, no, yeah, thank you for sharing. This is definitely a learning opportunity for me, and yes, I would really love to put it in practice. And yes, I'm happy we have this decision to discuss and to plan even after this class ends. So yeah, definitely, and of course that the invitation is also reciprocal. So yes, I would be happy to host you also here, or to consider maybe conferences or meetings that could facilitate the further discussion. Yes. Great. So
Well,
thank you so much for the participation. We still have 2 lectures, so more time to discuss.
in the middle, the course, well, I hope that this experience is for you very important. For us, I think it's very important. So we can project the next session, ¿no? The next Wednesday. Amigos,
Yes.
amigas, muchas gracias por su presencia y nos encontramos la próxima semana, el día miércoles, a las 11 de la mañana. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Muchas gracias. Have a good day. Hasta luego.
Thank you,
Bye.
Professor Rodica.
Thank you very
Gracias.
much.
Thank you very much.
you.
Rodica.
Thank you very much.
Please, Rodica, could be a picture? No. Well, okay.
Thank you very much.